Hello, my name's Jessica and I'm an epilepsy nurse. I'm going to talk to you about seizures and what happens in the brain. Our brains are made up of millions of nerve cells, and when these nerve cells communicate, they use neurotransmitters. These are chemicals in the brain. When neurotransmitters communicate, they produce a little electrical impulse. These electrical impulses are called action potentials. When you get a burst firing of action potentials, this can result in a seizure. I'll be talking about two different types of epilepsy, generalized and focal. Seizures can start anywhere in the brain. Depending on where in the brain a seizure starts can affect what it looks like or feels like. If it starts in your frontal lobe, you might get motor symptoms. These are movements like twitching. If it starts in your occipital lobe, you might get visual symptoms like blobs of colour coming in and out of your visual fields. But the commonest place for seizures to start in focal epilepsy is the temporal lobe. So, if the seizure started in your temporal lobe, what would happen is that the seizures would gradually spread, or what we call propagate. Only a small amount of the cortex would be affected, and therefore only a small amount of you would be affected. But the rest of the brain is working normally. Therefore you may be fully awake but experience strange symptoms like déjà vu. And that could be it, or it could spread further. As it spreads, more of you becomes affected. You may have some awareness of the seizure, but some people have no awareness of it at all. Sometimes people might have symptoms where they fiddle with things. They may or may not verbalize. These events usually last 30 seconds to 1 or 2 minutes. If the seizure spreads further, then this can affect the whole brain in a convulsive seizure, or what we call a tonic-clonic seizure. This is where someone goes stiff and then they have violent jerks. These seizures last 1 or 2 minutes and are usually self-terminating. And then afterwards, because your brain has used a lot of oxygen and glucose, it's very tired, and you can be confused because your brain is rebooting. Essentially what happens is a little motorway system sets up in your brain. So the seizures will always be stereotyped. They will always go down the same roadmap. One person can have many different seizure types, and they can happen at any time, but this is perfectly normal. In generalized epilepsy, what can happen is the brain can be affected simultaneously. What we believe is that somewhere in the center of the brain causes a reaction. All of the nerves react simultaneously and the whole of the cortex can be affected. It's a bit like switching off the lights. For example, in an absence, someone might suddenly become blank in the middle of a sentence and then be able to carry on with no awareness that they've had an absence. Or a myoclonic jerk, where someone might have a very brief muscle jerk. Or a generalized tonic-clonic seizure or convulsive seizure, where someone might suddenly lose awareness, become stiff and can jerk all of their limbs. So, that's a broad description of what happens in the brain. As I mentioned, what happens to you is completely unique. To make a good plan, you must have a clear understanding of your condition. You can only deal with the things you have and base your plan around those. What's your definition of epilepsy?